Pat's voice was so thin I barely recognized it. "Don't hang up," he whispered. Behind him, Lauren was talking sharply and frantically like a kettle left on too long. "Your son signed it all to me, Kate. He said you abandoned the company when he needed you most." Outside our window, a distant truck engine revved somewhere down the back road. It sounded like a warning growl. "Pat," I said, forcing my voice steady, "put me on speaker. And don't sign another page. Not one." He swallowed hard. "She's holding the final papers. Won't let us read them. Keep saying, you abandoned him." Then he said the sentence that turned my blood to ice. "They're liquidating tomorrow, everything we built." As he spoke, my mind snapped back to the moment this nightmare started. The moment I learned trust was a luxury we couldn't afford. 10 years earlier, the day after our son's funeral, Lauren stood in our living room, tears glistening like polished glass, clutching the transfer documents she'd somehow convinced him to sign. I stood in the kitchen, coffee cooling in my grip, staring at her like she was a stranger who'd stolen our world. Our family company was never just business, it was our legacy, built from Pat's calloused hands and my sharp ledgers, board meetings blending with holiday dinners. I typed a note to myself that night, "Watch her." Pat agreed in silence. 3 dots in my mind. Then the first clues surfaced, whispers of her affairs. No apology, no explanation, just a verdict from the grave. Before I could grieve properly, another blow landed, from the lawyers confirming the full transfer. Clean, polite, and absolute. Lauren was the golden daughter-in-law we'd welcomed with open arms. We'd toasted her at the wedding. We'd helped them buy their first house. When our son smiled at her, we thought we saw his future. But growing up, she'd taught me something. When someone's story is too perfect, you're only seeing what they want you to see. I'm 62 now. When our son needed us, we gave him everything: college, a place in the company, unconditional love. When Lauren needed sympathy, we offered it freely. When we needed truth, we got tight-lipped smiles and, you wouldn't understand the pressures he was under. When our boy died in that crash, Patrick called it suspicious. When I found the first photograph, Lauren's silver Audi parked on the dirty road at midnight, another car beside it, I called it proof. 7 days of silence. 7 days of Lauren consolidating control. 7 days of us pretending we didn't know what was coming. And now, with liquidation papers ready to sign and our life's work hours from being sold off piece by piece, it was finally time. Because what Lauren didn't know, what she couldn't have known while she was so busy playing the grieving widow, was that we'd been watching. Documenting. Building a case that would make her decade-long con look like amateur hour. The dirty road had given her cover for 10 years. Now it was going to give us everything back. The rain started during the eulogy. Not the soft, respectful kind you see in movies. Harsh, cold drops that hammered the black umbrellas and turned the cemetery grass to mud. I stood between Patrick and Lauren, watching the coffin sink into the earth, and felt like I was drowning in my own skin. Our boy. Our only child. Gone at 32. Lauren sobbed into a silk handkerchief, her shoulders shaking just right. Her vanilla perfume, expensive, the kind that probably cost more than our first car, hung thick in the damp air, mixing with the smell of wet dirt and dying flowers. Every few seconds, she'd press the handkerchief to her perfectly made-up face, careful not to smudge her mascara. I cried too. Real tears that burned and blurred everything. Patrick stood like a statue beside me, jaw locked, staring at the coffin like if he looked hard enough, he could will our son back to life. He was everything to me, Lauren whispered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. I don't know how I'll go on. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Too practiced. Too smooth. The funeral ended and people filed past, squeezing our hands, mumbling the useless things people say. He's in a better place. Time heals. Let us know if you need anything. Lauren accepted every hug, every condolence, with the grace of a woman who'd rehearsed this moment. And maybe that was unfair. Maybe grief looked different on everyone. Maybe I was just looking for someone to blame because the universe felt too big and cruel to fight. But then I saw it. We gathered at the lawyer's office 3 hours later, still in our funeral clothes. The reading of the will. I didn't even know our son had made one. He was young, healthy, always talking about the future like he had decades to plan. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat and read the words that would change everything. I leave O'Connor Manufacturing, in its entirety, to my wife, Lauren Fitzpatrick. Patrick's hand found mine under the table. Squeezed hard. I looked at Lauren. Watched her face carefully. And there it was, just for a second, so quick I almost missed it. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. Not a sad smile. Not a grateful one. A satisfied one. That wasn't mourning in her eyes. It was a victory. I leaned close to Patrick, close enough that my lips nearly brushed his ear, and whispered 4 words that would define the next 10 years of our lives. We need to watch her. He didn't ask why. Didn't question it. He'd seen it too. Outside the lawyer's office, the rain had finally stopped. Lauren walked to her car, phone already pressed to her ear, heels clicking on the wet pavement like she was walking away from a business meeting, not our son's grave. And we stood there in the parking lot, hand in hand, watching her drive away. The long game had begun. Lauren came into our lives on a Tuesday in spring, 5 years before the funeral. Our son brought her to Sunday dinner with that nervous excitement young men get when they've found someone they think is special. Mom, Dad, this is Lauren. She stood in our doorway wearing a cream sundress, her dark hair catching the late afternoon light. When she smiled, it was like watching sunshine break through clouds. Mr. and Mrs. O'Connor, I've heard so much about you. Her handshake was firm, confident. Your son talks about the company constantly. You must be so proud of what you've built. Patrick squeezed my hand under the table during dinner. The good kind of squeeze, the one that meant maybe this is it, maybe our boy found his person. She asked smart questions about the business. Laughed at Patrick's terrible jokes. Helped me clear dishes without being asked. By dessert, I was already imagining grandchildren. She's perfect, I told Patrick that night as we got ready for bed. She is, he agreed. But something in his voice sounded careful. Waiting. The wedding came 14 months later. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. The bells at St. Catherine's echoed through the valley, and when I watched our son slip that ring on her finger, I cried the way mothers do, half joy, half grief that he wasn't ours alone anymore. Lauren tucked her hair behind her ear during the vows, smiling at us over his shoulder. Smiling like she owned us already. The red flag started small. Easy to explain away. 3 months into the marriage, I stopped by their house with leftover pot roast. Lauren was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and sharp. When she saw me through the window, she switched instantly, laughed, said, "Love you too, Mom," and hung up. But I'd heard what she said before she noticed me. Just a few more months. I'm handling it. Everything okay? I asked when she opened the door. Of course. That sunshine smile again. Just family drama. You know how mothers can be. I did know. But something about it sat wrong in my stomach. Patrick noticed things too. How she always wanted to talk business with our son. How she'd steer conversations toward company finances, expansion plans, client lists. How she'd check her phone constantly during family dinners, then slip away to take calls that she never explained. Maybe she's just interested, I said, wanting to believe it. Maybe, Patrick said. But that night, he pulled an old notebook from his desk drawer, the kind with the marbled cover we used to use for inventory counts. He wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then, Lauren, phone call, handling it, who? I watched him write and felt my hope crack like ice in spring. Just in case, he said quietly. Just so we remember the details if we ever need them. I nodded and added my own note underneath, always watching us during business talk. Taking notes? The journal went into the locked drawer of Patrick's desk. We didn't know then that we'd fill 3 more notebooks before this was over. One evening, I saw Lauren leave our son's office early. She said she had a meeting, but her eyes moved too fast when she spoke. I waited until her car pulled away, then I followed in Pat's old truck. I kept the headlights off and stayed far back. My heart beat hard against my ribs. The road turned narrow and bumpy. Trees closed in on both sides, their branches scratching the sky. Gravel crunched under my tires, loud in the quiet night. I slowed down and parked behind a thick row of bushes. Ahead, Lauren's car sat under a single streetlight. Another car was already there. I stepped out carefully. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. My shoes pressed into soft dirt. I crouched low and moved closer, my phone ready in my hand. Through the trees, I saw her. She stepped out, her coat open, her hair loose. A man waited by the other car. They spoke in low voices, then she laughed, a soft, private sound that carried on the night air. My fingers shook as I lifted the phone. The camera clicked once, twice. The flash was off, but the screen lit my face for a second. I ducked lower. Lauren turned her head, looking around. I held my breath until she turned back to the man. They moved closer together. I took 3 more photos before slipping away. When I got home, Pat was waiting in the kitchen. The light above the table was dim. I showed him the pictures. His face went hard. The lines around his mouth deepened. She's meeting someone, I said quietly. Pat stared at the screen for a long time. Then he nodded. We need proof. Real proof. That same night, he went to the hardware store. He came back with small recorders, tiny black boxes that could hide behind books or under shelves. We placed them in the living room, the hallway, the office. Pat's hands were steady as he worked. Mine were not. We didn't speak much after that. We just looked at each other. The anger inside me was like a low fire, hot but controlled. It didn't burn wild. It burned steadily. I wanted to shout, to run to our son and tell him everything. But I knew better. One wrong move, and Lauren would slip away. That road wasn't just dirt, it was her undoing, one footprint at a time. We kept the notebook updated. Dates. Times. Photos. Recordings. Every piece went in. Every night, Pat and I sat together in the dark, listening to the quiet house. waiting, watching. The secret grew between us like a wall, strong and hidden. We were building something. Not with wood or steel. With patience. With proof. Time moved slowly after that night on the dirty road. Lauren became part of every corner of our son's life. She started coming to the office more often. At first, it seemed helpful. She brought coffee, smiled at the workers, and asked smart questions. But soon she began suggesting changes. Small ones at first: new software, different suppliers, meetings without our son in the room. He listened to her. He trusted her. She started pulling him away from us. Family dinners became fewer. When we did see them, she always had a reason to leave early. She spoke for him more. "He's tired," she would say. "He's busy." Our son nodded and smiled, but his eyes looked distant. He stopped calling us as often. When we asked how things were going, he said, "Everything's fine." His voice sounded thin, like he was reading from a script. Lauren kept the company running smoothly on the outside. Inside, things were changing. Money moved in quiet ways. New accounts opened. Old ones closed. Pat and I saw the numbers on the statements when they still came to the house. We noticed the patterns. Big withdrawals. Strange payments. We copied every page before she could stop the mail. We kept pretending. We smiled at her dinners. We laughed at her stories. We asked polite questions and thanked her for looking after our son. But our eyes never forgot. Every time she tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled, we remembered the photos. Every time her watch ticked on her wrist, like a countdown, we felt the pressure building. Pat started to look older. The lines on his face grew deeper. His shoulders stooped a little more each month. He didn't sleep well. Some nights I found him sitting in the dark kitchen, staring at nothing. The stress was eating at him. His hands shook when he held a coffee cup. His breathing sounded heavy. I worried about his heart, but he waved it away. "We have to keep going," he said. For him. For us. We added more to the notebook. Dates of meetings. Names of people who came to the house. Statements from workers who whispered about changes they didn't like. One old accountant gave us a quiet statement on paper. He said he saw things that didn't feel right. We kept his name safe. We kept everything hidden. The days turned into months. Then years. Lauren grew bolder. She pushed our son to sign more papers. She said it was for the future. He believed her. We watched from the shadows, collecting every piece. The helplessness was heavy at first. It pressed on my chest like a stone. But slowly, something stronger grew inside me. Patience. Purpose. We were not weak. We were waiting. The fire inside us burned low and steady. We smiled when we had to. We waited when we wanted to scream. And we kept building the proof, one quiet step at a time. The phone call came late at night. A police officer's voice, calm and careful, told us there had been an accident. Our son's car went off the road. He didn't make it. The words felt far away, like they belonged to someone else's life. Pat dropped the phone. I caught it before it hit the floor. My legs gave out, and I sat hard on the kitchen chair. We drove to the hospital in silence. The roads were dark and wet. Rain streaked the windows. Inside, the halls smelled of strong cleaner and coffee. The doctor met us with sad eyes. He said it looked like the brakes failed. A single-car crash. Quick. No pain. But something in his voice paused when he mentioned the autopsy. "We'll know more soon," he said. They let us see him one last time. The room was cold. The beeps from machines had already stopped. His face looked peaceful, but wrong. Too still. I held his hand. It was cool already. Pat stood beside me, his big shoulders shaking without sound. The loss hit like a wave, pulling everything under. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Only feel the space where my boy used to be. Later, when they gave us his things, I found the note. It was folded small inside his wallet, behind his driver's license. The paper was thin, the ink a little smudged. His handwriting, quick and slanted. It said, "If anything happens to me, check the dirty road. She's not who she seems. Watch her, Mom. Love you both." The cold metal of his watch brushed my palm as I closed the wallet. The note felt heavy, like it carried all his fear. The hospital beeps were gone now, but they still echoed in my head, fading slower. Pat read it over my shoulder. His hand rested on my arm, steady even though he shook. Tears ran down his face, but his eyes changed. Hardened. The grief was still there, crushing and deep. But under it, something new grew. A fire. Not wild. Controlled. Hot enough to burn away the helplessness. Lauren called the next day, her voice breaking with tears. She sounded perfect in her sadness. But now I knew. His last words, "Watch the road, Mom." We would. More than ever. The proof we had been gathering quietly now had a purpose. A sharp one. We would not stop until the truth came out. For him. After the funeral, Lauren moved fast. The lawyers handed her the keys to everything. She walked into the company offices, as she had always belonged there. New signs went up with her name. Workers who had been with us for years started leaving. She said it was for fresh ideas. But we knew better. The money began to disappear. Big trips. Fancy cars. A new house far from ours. Bank statements came less often, then stopped altogether. When we asked, she smiled and said, "It's all under control. Don't worry." Our savings shrank. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. We sold small things first, the boat Pat loved, my mother's old jewelry. Then bigger things. The house felt colder, emptier. Meals became simple. Heat turned low in winter. Pat's health got worse. His cough lingered. He lost weight. Nights, he paced the floor, his steps heavy on the old wood. "We can't wait forever, Kate," he said one evening, his voice rough. "She's taking it all." I looked at the empty bank statements in my hands. The paper crackled as I folded them, thin and dry like dead leaves. Outside, distant road traffic hummed from the dirty road, faint but steady, like a reminder. I felt the resignation first heavy, like a blanket too thick to move under. But it turned into something sharper. Quiet rage. It sat in my chest, warm and waiting. "We need more proof," I said. "Solid. Undeniable. Pat stopped pacing. He looked at me, eyes tired but fierce. I nodded. The next day, we used what little money we had left to hire a private investigator. A quiet man who knew how to watch without being seen. He followed Lauren. Took photos on the dirty road. Talked to people who had seen things. Got statements on paper, signed and dated. Lauren grew bolder. She threw parties. Bought clothes that cost more than our monthly food. She acted like the company was hers alone to spend. Her watch ticked louder in my memory, like a countdown she didn't know was running out. Pat wanted to confront her. Now, he said, his hands shaking. Before there's nothing left. I took his hand. Soon, I whispered. But right now, we wait until we can't lose. She spent our blood money like water, but we were the tide waiting to turn. The years dragged. The toll was deep, Pat's gray hair turned white, his steps slower. My hands ached from writing notes late at night. But the rage stayed quiet. Strong. We added every new piece to our hidden files. The investigator brought more. We were ready, even if it hurt. We endured. For the truth. For him. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 10 years after the nightmare began. Lauren walked into our small kitchen, her expensive heels clicking like a clock against the linoleum. She didn't offer tea or a kind word. Instead, she dropped a thick folder on the table and told us she was liquidating the company. Everything we had built, the factory, the name, and our son's legacy, was being sold off to the highest bidder in 48 hours. She looked at us with a look of pity, as if we were already gone. A cold fear of failure tried to grip my heart, but it couldn't find a hold. For a moment, the room felt too small, but then I looked at Pat. He wasn't shaking anymore. His jaw was set, and his eyes were clear. We spent that entire night in the basement, under the glow of a single dusty light bulb. The time for hiding was over. We began to compile the full dossier, the mountain of evidence we had gathered in the dark. I heard the sound of envelope seals snapping open as we pulled out 10 years of secrets. We laid it all out on the cold floor, organizing the chaos into a lethal timeline. There were the photos from the dirty road, showing Lauren with the men she used to cheat on our son. The financial trails and bank records were showing every dollar she had drained from the company accounts to fund her luxury life. We included the affidavits from old employees who had been forced out by her greed. Finally, we placed the most important piece in the center, our son's final note and the autopsy report that linked his accident to the sedatives Lauren had secretly bought. Pat's steady breath beside me was the only sound in the room. He handed me the final staples, his hand strong and sure as he helped me bind the pages. The helplessness we had lived with for a decade vanished, replaced by a feeling of empowered readiness. We weren't the victims anymore, we were the judges. Everything she had done in the shadows was finally captured in these pages, ready to be brought into the light. 10 years of shadows, now stepping into light, I whispered. We bound the papers into 3 identical thick books. One was for the board of directors, one was for the police, and one was for the woman who thought she had already won. As the sun began to rise, we didn't feel tired. We felt like we were finally waking up from a long, bad dream. The long con was about to be reversed. We had survived the poverty and the silence, and now, we had the truth. Tomorrow, the golden daughter-in-law would find out that some legacies cannot be sold. The boardroom felt colder than the cemetery had 10 years ago. Lauren sat at the head of the long oak table, dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer. She looked like a queen about to sign a treaty. She didn't even look up when Pat and I walked in. She was too busy checking her diamond watch, the one she bought while we were struggling to pay for groceries. "You're late," she said, her voice smooth and bored. "Let's get this over with. The buyers are waiting." I didn't sit down. I walked to the center of the table and placed the 3 heavy books down with a loud thud. The sound of papers slapping the table echoed through the room like a gunshot. Lauren finally looked up, her hazel eyes narrowing. "What is this, Kate?" "I don't have time for scrapbooks." "It isn't a scrapbook, Lauren," I said, my voice low and like velvet-edged stone. "It is an ending." I opened the first book and pushed it toward the board members. I opened the second and slid it toward her. Lauren's hands, usually so steady, stayed still for a moment. Then, she turned the first page. I watched the color drain from her face. The photos of the dirty road were right there. The bank records showing the stolen millions were highlighted in bright yellow. Lauren's gasp echoed in the room, a sharp, ragged sound that shattered her perfect façade. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. "This is fake," she stammered, her fingers digging into the paper. "You can't prove any of this." "The police are already at your house, Lauren," Pat said, his voice gravelly and strong. "And the bank has already frozen every account you touched. We didn't just watch you. We tracked you." Lauren looked at the board, looking for help, but they were staring at the evidence of her fraud. Her aristocratic mask was gone, replaced by a look of pure, raw panic. She looked small. She looked caught. I leaned over the table, my ice blue eyes locking onto hers. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the easy mother anymore. "You thought you won everything. We were playing a different game," I told her. As the realization hit her, she slumped back into the chair she had stolen from us. The silence in the room was heavy and final. For 10 years, we had lived in the shadows of her lies, swallowing our grief and our pride. But as the door opened and the officers stepped inside, the weight finally lifted. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a triumphant release. Justice wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but as they led her away, I knew our son's legacy was finally safe. The long game was over, and we were the only ones left standing. The weeks that followed the boardroom reveal felt like the slow breaking of a long winter. The courtroom was quiet on the day of the hearing, the only loud sound being the heavy thudding of the judge's gavel. It was the sound of finality. Lauren sat at the defense table, but she didn't look like the powerful woman who had uninvited us from our own lives. She looked thin and pale, her glossy chestnut hair dull under the flickering office lights. The judge read the indictments for fraud and the seizure of her assets, and for the first time in a decade, the weight on my chest began to lift. Everything she had taken was being returned. The luxury cars were sold, the designer clothes were packed away, and the family company, our legacy, was back in our hands. But as we stood on the courthouse steps afterward, the victory felt bittersweet. We had our name back, and we had our money back, but the 10 years we had spent in the shadows could never be returned. We had lost our son, and we had lost a decade of peace. Pat turned to me and pulled me into a warm embrace. His wool blazer smelled like home and cedar. He felt stronger now, his shoulders squared as if the burden of the secret had finally been washed away. We didn't need to hide the black journal anymore. We didn't need to whisper in the kitchen or follow cars down back roads. The dirty road that Lauren had used to hide her affairs and her crimes was no longer a threat. I looked at Pat and whispered, "The dirty road led us back to what was ours." That evening, we sat in our living room without the television on. For years, we had avoided talking about the pain because the truth was too dangerous to say out loud. Now, the healing began with honest talks. We talked about our son, not the version Lauren had created, but the real boy who loved fishing and worked hard at the mill. We talked about how we had nearly let our grief turn us into ghosts. The company was ours again, but we decided to run it differently. No more secrets, no more golden favorites. We were building something new on a foundation of truth. The cost had been high, and the scars on our hearts were deep, but as I watched the sunset from our porch, I felt a quiet peace. We had survived the long game. We had protected our family's story, and finally, the only thing left to build was a future where we could breathe again. The company doors opened again, but the air inside felt different. It was no longer thick with the heavy perfume of lies or the pressure of keeping up appearances. Pat and I walked through the hallways, greeting the workers who had stayed loyal through the dark years. We rebuilt the business with new rules and clear boundaries. Every ledger was open, and every meeting was honest. We were no longer just chasing profits, we were guarding a legacy that had almost been erased. A strange kind of peace settled over our home. It wasn't the perfect happiness we had before our son died, but it was real. I still think of Lauren sometimes, sitting in her cold cell, stripped of the luxury she tried to steal. I haven't found it in my heart to offer full forgiveness, and I don't think I ever will. Some betrayals go too deep for that. But there is a power in forward movement. We chose to live our lives for the truth instead of hiding from the pain. I share our story now as a warning to others. I tell people about the golden child who isn't what they seem, and the quiet child who is always expected to be fine. I talk about how easy it is to look away because you want to keep the peace. But peace without truth is just a lie waiting to explode. We learned the hard way that vigilance is the price of protection. You must ask the hard questions, even when the answers might break your heart. Pat still wears his thin gold wedding band, and I still wear the silver locket that holds our son's picture. We are older now, and the silver in my hair has grown thicker, but our spirits are unbreakable. We proved that patience is a weapon and that a mother's love, mixed with a little bit of steel, can move mountains. The company is strong, our marriage is solid, and our son's name is finally cleared of the mud Lauren tried to throw on it. If this story stirs suspicions in your own life, do not wait 10 years to find the answer. Don't ruin the holiday, silence your gut feeling. Trust your instincts and protect what you have built with your own 2 hands. Act before the road turns dirty. And for more tales of patient justice and hard-won truths, subscribe and join us.